Now, y'all tell me what you think, but in my opinion, the Spawn of Possession record from 2012 called Incurso is one of the best tech death records of that 2010 to 2020 era, if not of all time, and certainly one of the most beloved and important. But unfortunately, that band split up in 2017, completely calling it quits and dashing any hopes that we had of ever getting a follow-up to that album. But here recently, I heard rumors that maybe those guys were working together again, and sure enough, they are back. However, this time they got a new band name. They're called Retromorphosis. And I wondered, why would you change your name? You have all that critical acclaim under your old name, and now you're changing your name, which means to most people, you're going to have to start all over. Only us hardcores are going to know it's them. And that is a huge challenge. So I was real curious why they would do that. And I got the benefit and the privilege to talk to Jonas of Retromorphosis, formerly Spawn of Possession, and hear straight from the guitarist's mouth why they changed the name. We talked about some other great things going on in death metal. We talked about some of the injuries and physical limitations they got from playing such demanding tech death and what they're doing in the future. I think you'll really enjoy this conversation if you love death metal the way that I love death metal. And if you're here, I think you do. So without further ado, here is Jonas from Retromorphosis. Jonas from Retromorphosis, welcome to Heavy Metal Philosophy.
Thank you.
I'm very excited to have you on because you and the guys, formerly Spawn of Possession, one of the most important, in my opinion, tech death records of the 2010s with Incurso. Now you guys have made your triumphant return. Name change, Retromorphosis. Why did you want to change the name?
Yeah, we ended Spawn of Possession in 2017. And after that, I slowly got into death metal again. Because when I wrote Incurso and Noctambulant, I wasn't really listening into death metal at all. So when I got into death metal again, I started to get the itch, to start write songs again. So I thought maybe I should have a more old school sounding death metal project, because that's the kind of music I'm into. I have been for the last 10 years or so. So, and the difference between Retro and Spawn is that Retro is way more varied. It's not focused on being super intense all the time. Some songs are intense, some are more old schoolish and slow, and so it's a broader way to write songs. It's not just technical.
And I can hear that listening to the new record too. I want to get to that in a moment, but the name Retromorphosis. So like a metamorphosis, it's the changing of the entity, but Retromorphosis, so it's going back. Is that intentional? You wanted to go back to the older death metal sound?
Yes, that's right. That's right. And the funny thing is that Retromorphosis was a suggestion. A difficult word. Maybe to be the title for the next Spawn album. So when we disbanded, and I started to think about the band name, and I remember that, Retromorphosis, and it fits because it's, as you said, it's more steeped in 90s death metal and so on. So it's a little bit going back. And also, the word Retromorphosis means a change for the worst. For the worse. So, and at that time when I started the project, my life was really shitty. So I said, this. Name is perfect, you know. So yeah, it's gonna be Retromorphosis.
Well, I don't mean to laugh at your misfortune, but
No, no,
that is quite clever.
yeah, yeah, it feels very honest.
Mm.
It does.
Now, I want to get to the new record. I don't want to harp too much on the past. So, just one more question. In Curso is such a beloved record. Do you, is it bother you, or are you worried at all that by not using the Spawn of Possession name, by going with a new name, like you could have probably done yourself a favor by continuing on as Spawn of Possession and using that goodwill from the fandom, but you kind of have to, unless people that are in the know, you kind of have to start over with a new name and get your name back out there again.
Yeah, for me, it made it way more relaxing writing
Oh,
it. I didn't have to have all that pressure on me. That's one thing. And the other thing is, I was kind of expecting the label maybe or some of the band members to want us to release it under the Spawn moniker, but no one said anything. So okay, this is retro. So
Season of Mist seems kind of cool like that. They seem to understand metalheads.
yeah, they don't want to dabble in the artistic things. They care about the product, but they don't want to, put their fingers into the music or how we want to represent things. So yeah, they are great.
Hmm. Well, speaking of the music, let's talk about the new music because, as you can see, I had those questions about the name coming into this, and then I
Yeah,
listened to the new album, and I was like, oh yeah, it is quite a bit different. It's way more chuggy. It's more content to ride on the low E string and chug it out a little bit. Still some technical leads. I hear choirs and subtle synth work that gives it sort of an eerie sort of vibe to it. Less BPM, more vibe.
yeah,
Would you agree with that?
yes, I agree with that. So yeah, and the synth thing was that's also a thing from the 90s band. They usually had synthesizers here and there. So I thought, oh, and from what I have heard from newer bands, it's not that usual anymore. So I thought to myself, I'm gonna use a lot of synthesizers. They are kind of buried in the mix sometimes, but they are only there to enhance the atmosphere.
I like that because a lot of synth heavy bands it can start to be overbearing. It can start to sound proggy or
Yeah,
orchestral, but this just sort of adds a tension and
yes,
a atmosphere to it.
yes. I was very careful with that because, like you said, I don't want it to sound like a progressive modern thing. It's more like a horror movie, maybe something
Yeah,
more in that style. Yes,
yeah. There's like a cosmic horror to it.
yeah.
Uh,
Thanks.
the word simplicity comes to mind, but that's definitely not the right word because it's still very much a very technical record. But I guess just listening to Incurso and then listening to this one,
Yeah.
in comparison, in relative terms, it's much more simple.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I think the name change was, we had to do that because otherwise people would probably be disappointed because either they want an Cursor 2 or something even more intense. And I'm not really into just writing intense songs. I want to write all kinds of songs. You
Mhm.
can't do that in Spawn. Everything has to be like super intense all the time, and fuck, I'm getting old. I don't feel like practicing like 8 hours a day and all that again.
So when you say intense, you mean like technically intense
Yeah, yeah,
because
that's
it's still very heavy.
Yeah, yeah, but it's more. It's not that hard for the fingers and the arms like Spawn. Spawn is Spawn is painful to play. It's not healthy to play that.
Well,
So
I had another question written down, and when you say that it was hard on the fingers to play this, let me just go ahead and move ahead to that question. I read that Christian has a ailment, focal dystonia. I'm
yeah,
sure I mispronounced that, but it's an issue with his fingers that made it very hard for him to perform those songs live.
yeah. I think his. I also had some problems, but my problems went away. But he has. I think his fingers goes numb, so he doesn't feel the fingers really.
Ooh.
But last time we talked about that, I think he knows how to handle it by warming up, and I don't remember exactly. He probably got really good advice from doctors and stuff. He he seems fine now.
Good. I'm glad to hear that because that's like a nightmare for guitar players. Like having any issues with our fingers. I just and then to play such demanding music too. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's that's a lot of anxiety to handle.
Yeah.
Especially if you're gonna play live, maybe on a tour for like a month, and you have this problem, it must be very difficult to handle. But he
Mm.
seems fine.
I'm so glad to hear that. Does that
Yeah.
mean that we can expect touring to promote this record?
We have barely talked about it. We live so different lives, so it's gonna be a little bit tricky to get everybody together.
Mm.
Everybody lives in different cities, countries, and they live different lives. Some have children and they work a lot. Maybe they can't just leave, like that. So if we're gonna do that, we have to plan many, many, many months ahead. So right now we are just focusing on the release of the album and probably gonna do some videos, playthrough videos maybe. We talked about that, and then we have to see what it's going to be difficult because if maybe like if we get how do you say it yeah, if a label contacts us and tells us a really big band wants us on a tour in about 2 months or so, that will be really hard to say no to that, but maybe if we can solve it, maybe, but I'm very skeptical because I know some of us can't leave home.
Yeah. And these days, touring is getting harder and harder. But
Yes,
maybe, hopefully, a festival date here or there, so the people
yeah,
can get a chance, and you all can get a chance.
yeah. I heard that about touring. We haven't toured. I haven't been on a tour since in Curso. Back then it was okay, but I heard it has been. It's a lot worse now. It's
Mm.
much harder and. It sounds kind of sucky, but yeah. But if it's a big tour, it's going to be fine, I think. Underground tours gonna be hell, I think.
Mm. Yeah. So you said that you weren't into death metal so much when Spawn faded out. What was going on there? Were you finding inspiration in other music?
Yeah, it was after the first album, Cabinet. I, I don't know what happened, but I got into classical music. So I pretty much just listened to classical music for like 10 years. And I listened to some other music like Black Sabbath and Metallica, some thrash metal, but mostly classical music. So, and then in like 2004, 14 or 15, I found my old record collection, vinyls, all my old death metal vinyls. And I had no turntable. So I'm gonna buy a turntable. So I bought one and I started to listen. And the vibe came back. So I just started to buy a lot of new vinyls from new bands playing old school death metal. And as the time went by, I just got the itch. So I have to write something.
That's interesting because I've been saying on this podcast for a couple of years now that we're in the midst of what I call the death metal renaissance. Because in my opinion, right around 2010-ish, death metal kind of went into a lull period. The 90s were great, the early 2000s were great, and then it just kind of I don't know what happened. It just kind of just wasn't going anywhere. But since 2019-ish, 2018-ish maybe to now, there's just so many great, young, hungry, groovy death metal bands. And like you say, playing old school stuff.
Yeah, lots of band. It's hard to keep up with everything. And I want to own the record. And it's hard to find. They only press maybe a couple of hundred.
Right.
So I agree with you. There's a lot of band, but I found some bands that started maybe around 2010 or something, and then they only released like one or two albums, and then they were gone. That makes me sad.
Yeah.
So much potential, and then they just drop it.
Yeah, there's that. And then also, like I say, it started around 2018, 2019, but bands will plug away in obscurity for years before we finally know who they are. So they're probably grinding well before then. It just seems like everything hit really recently.
Yeah, it's go up and down. I remember in the late 90s we had a dip as well, as I remember it. Because in the early 90s, we have this huge flood with bands, Entomb, Dismember, Morbid, all bands, and every record was great. And in the end of 90s, it felt like it was dipping. Nothing really happened. And then, as you said, in the early 2000s, a couple of years later, woof, a lot of new stuff happened, like technical death metal and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like we need to really enjoy what's going on right now because it goes up and down.
Yeah, exactly.
But the cool thing is we never know, who's going to be the next bolt thrower. It's we can pine for the good old days, but those records still exist and we can listen to them all we want. Like you said, you were still listening to those Black Sabbath records. It's like the tried and true ones you can always go back to.
Yeah. Some music is timeless, I think, and that goes for death metal as well. It's the same for me. It's timeless. Some albums from the 90s, 80s, it sounds as good today as it did back then. So
you started to get that itch again.
Yeah.
So when do you call the guys and be like, "Hey, y'all want to try to do this again?"
Yeah, I demoed a bunch of songs, and then I asked Dennis if he was interested in doing vocals. And he listened to the songs and he said, "Yeah, sure, I can do it, no problem." And then he went on the Cali Death podcast, and he met Casey, the drummer, on the podcast, and they started to talk, like friends after that. And Dennis just asked him, "Do you want to play drums in this new thing?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." So it was really, easy. Everything just came together very naturally, and yeah, it's a great thing that everybody still plays. So because some guys they quit, after a couple. Everybody was already warm in their clothes and just jumped right into it and recorded their parts.
So you were still playing during your classical phase. Were you playing like a lot of classical guitar? Do you have like the nylon string guitar? And
Yeah, uh,
yeah, that's awesome. I want to get one of those and get into that myself. I love flamenco guitar. I love
yeah,
classical guitar. It's so chill and you can just get into the zone and just the world doesn't exist for a while.
yeah. It's super nice because it's when I play the electric guitar, I only play to write, write and practice the songs. But when I play classical, I really don't have to invent anything. I just have to practice. So it's very relaxing and yeah, I love it. So I have breaks here and there where I only play classical. I'm
Do
not
you,
super good at it, but I enjoy it. It's like therapy for me.
mm. Do you think some of that came into the new record because it's not as there's a lot of alien sounds on those Spawn and Possession ones, and they just move to the next thing so quickly. But
Yeah.
this one can kind of vamp a little bit.
Do you mean classical stuff?
Yes.
Yeah, I think the machine is a pretty good example of that. It has a kind of a baroque melody in it. The whole song is based around this baroque melody thing. And maybe the tree has a small part in it. No, it's not that much on in retro as it was in Spawn. In Cursor was completely my classical inspirations uh, turned into death metal, more or less. So I think in Cursor is way more melodic than Retromorphosis is.
Hmm. That's interesting way because there's definitely more lead on in Curso. Like I was talking about, the new one is chuggier,
Yeah,
but
it's
to
more
me
than
that allows the melody to breathe more. So I don't
yeah.
know. It kind of seems more melodic to me.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's more meat. It's more death metal in Retromorphosis, I think.
Yeah.
In Spawn, it was a lot of experimentation and trying new ways. So maybe not everything sounds pure death metal, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of classical influences on Spawn. In this, it's more death metal.
What's the timeline on this? You start to get the itch, you demo, you call everybody. February 21st, this album's coming out. How much time are we talking here?
Oh, we started in 2020.
Oh,
I did the
right in the
demo.
pandemic.
Yeah, I wrote most of it during the pandemic because my workplace closed down.
Oh,
So I said to myself, shit, now it's the time to write.
mm,
So I wrote a lot of songs in a short time, and then I demoed them, and then yeah, I got Dennis and Casey in the band, so we were only three from the beginning. And then I tried to find a label. And finding a label during the pandemic wasn't
mm,
the best idea because no one was, no, we can't do it. We have to be really careful with the money. They wanted us to pay for the recording ourselves and
mm.
then give it to them. And I said, no, 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 we can't afford that. And then in 2023, maybe, I was talking to Ragnar, the drummer from Obsidian One. We were chatting, and I told him, "Fuck, it's really hard to get a label because all the labels just don't want to take the chance." So he said, "My band is on Season of Mist. I can put you in contact with the boss." So he did that, and I talked to the boss, and I sent over all the songs, basically the whole album in a demo. And he right away, yeah, you are signed. So What do you need? Yeah, we need a studio budget and blah blah blah. And yeah, no problem. So super smooth.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Everything seems to just have fallen into place. All the guys were on board.
yeah,
You have time. The label is there's a lot of nightmare stories about labels. Like you were saying earlier, you would expect them to want you to use the name that made you famous,
yeah.
and that's what never said anything. Here's the budget. That's amazing.
Yeah, because we were in contact with another big label before Season of Mist, a couple of months before, and they said they didn't want to release it if it wasn't Spawn Possession.
Mm.
So they tried to dab, try to put their fingers into it. So, yeah,
Well, I'm glad it worked out the way it did. Now, it seems like there's a lot of pieces that just sort of fell into place for you.
yeah.
Do you need that going forward? Are you going to do more records after this? Or are you just focused on this one? Let's see how it goes.
Yeah, my goal is to make more records. It feels really weird to just make one record and then disappear again. So I hope we can make more records. So yeah, that's the goal to have is like a continuing project or band or whatever you want to call it.
Mm. I'm glad to hear that because I've heard the record. I think it's great. It's heavy. It's groovy. It's moody. I think it's great. I think people are going to love it. It's called Psalmus Mortis and it's coming out February the 21st. Good luck with the release. Thank you so much. And please keep us posted if there's going to be any festival appearances or videos or whatever.
Yeah,
We'll be super excited for it.
yeah. Thanks. Thanks.
Thank